Hey, everybody. Hi, Leslie.
Hello.
Hi, Maggie. Oh, thanks for joining us, ladies.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Maggie.
Did I see Audia too?
What's that?
I thought I saw Audia too. She must be here.
Can you turn that up some? I can't hear.
Yeah, she's here.
Cool. I'm going to go back on mute because my place is loud.
Right. Okay, well, welcome, everybody, to the third session of Introduction to Libertarianism. This will be our last meeting, unless there's other plans otherwise. What I wanted to do at this meetup was build on our previous conversations. The first session sort of focused on the core of what libertarianism is in the way of the non-aggression principle on one hand and property rights and self-ownership on the other hand. So those two things sort of form the basis of libertarian thinking. And then in the latter part of that class and in the second class, what we looked at was how to apply those principles of the non-aggression principle and property rights to specific issues of the day. Children. I guess we didn't talk too much about money, but let me just get that up here and we'll just go recap some of those items. So we looked at, the provision of justice, police services, defense, regulation. We also looked at monarchy versus democracy and the problems that they have versus each other and on their own. And I guess I'll leave it there. We talked about the social contract too, and whether or not that constituted anything legitimate. So to build on that, I think the best thing we can do in the last session is to look into the future a little bit and how that future lives for us in the present. By that I mean, like, we have a future that we're living into. And the future we're living into gives us a particular way of being in the present. Right? So, just to kind of give you an example that'll at an individual level. Let's suppose you have a job in an office and it's Friday and about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the boss comes in and puts down this giant stack of paper on your desk for you to do. So how does that look to you right then? It's like there's a future in that stack of papers, and it's not a happy one, right? It's like, ugh. So that future gives you a way of being. Now let's just suppose the same thing is happening, but Saturday morning, you've got 2 tickets to Hawaii. Right? You're going to have a vacation in Hawaii. Same thing happens. The boss comes in, plops down a stack of papers on your desk. Now, how are you being? More like, woohoo, I'm going to Hawaii. Yeah? Yeah. So it's like the future you're living into gives you your being in the present. You get that? Like, it actually impacts the present profoundly. It creates a context for what's happening now that alters how that occurs for us. So understanding this sort of simple ontological principle is actually really important, because the future we're living into as regards liberty, justice, are we living in a just society? Do we have a prospect for justice? Do we have a prospect for freedom? Like, though, that future we're living into impacts right now for us, right? I mean, if the future we're living into is such that the present lives for us as desperate, hopeless, a struggle full of injustice, hate, conflict. If the future we're living into gives us that kind of present, we will lack power and freedom and self-expression and peace of mind that we need in order to advance liberty, in order to advance justice, in order to create a great life for ourselves and the people we care about. So what I'm talking about here isn't necessarily like the truth, in capital letters, truth, because we don't know what the future is. This may not end well. We just don't know. But what we do know is that the future we're living into powerfully impacts the present. Are you listening to something else on the phone, Daniel?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so could you turn off your turn off your speaker? Okay, no? So that isn't really working for me. Maybe you could just disconnect because you're here anyway. Anyway, so what we want to do is intentionally, what I'm suggesting we do is intentionally create a future to live into in this area of liberty that actually empowers us. And there will be the matter of evidence. So the first thing our minds do is look for evidence. Is that future we've created, like actually a real or a thing? And then there'll be evidence for and against that. We do have a negativity bias that we tend to pay more attention to the evidence against it, right? So we want to know that going into it. And like, there is something to be said for creating that future and caring for it and treating it as a promise, regardless of any evidence leading the way or lack of evidence leading the way. So, obviously I'm not really talking about libertarianism here. I'm really talking about being human and the matter of who we are for, and how our lives work for us. But that actually matters a great deal, because if our lives aren't working for us, then we can't be powerful advocates or agents for liberty. So what I want to do here going forward with that kind of piece in place is talk a little bit about what a libertarian society might look like. And I want you to think about this as a possible future that you could give your life to. Like something that would really inspire and move and touch you. And we're going to create this together, the five of us. Okay? Like, I don't have the answer. That's not my job in this conversation, is to provide a bunch of answers. Okay, what we're doing here is creating something. Okay, we are creating a future that we can live into, that we can give our lives to, that we can care about, that we can love, that we can appreciate, that we can share with others, because it moves us and touches and inspires us. What we're up against with that is our own resignation and cynicism. That lives in each one of us here. And you know how that is. It's heavy and it's dark and it's desperate. It's frightened. So acknowledge that, set it aside for a moment. It'll still be there when this conversation is over if you care to go get it. It'll be waiting for you. So what could a libertarian society look like? Who'd like to start us out? What could a libertarian society look like? Like as an experience? What would it be like? Yeah.
For me, Frank, my very first thought goes to relations with my neighbor. So how do I want to live? I want to live in peace with my neighbors. How do I live in peace with my neighbors? I have to have conflict resolution skills of my own, or have someone nearby who can help me with conflict resolution with my neighbors. And that leads me to like emotional intelligence, which leads me to education. So for me, an education system of some sort, community education system about emotional intelligence, and a population that is emotionally intelligent and can handle conflict. So that's one thing for me. That's actually the thing for me.
Peace with your neighbor?
Peace with my neighbor and conflict resolution skills intrapersonal communication skills.
Yeah. So if you had, let me just kind of go into that a little bit deeper with you. If you had confidence, complete confidence in the availability of conflict resolution, and if emotional intelligence was present, and if you were at peace with your neighbor, what would that make available for you?
Well, it would. What would it make available? Well,
Yeah.
available resources that we spend on police. So that's one. It would alter resource allocation for my community. It would make available an internal sense of peace and a calmer nervous system. And when our nervous systems are calmer and when we feel safe, we behave better. And so then the cascade from that, I believe, would be more peace.
Yeah. Would you mind if I phrase that as well-being and peace of mind? That works for you? All right, great. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth because, like I said, this isn't my conversation; it's ours. But I am kind of writing a few things down so we can recap it at the end. Okay, great. Now, who else? Who else can contribute? Who else? Well, you start by. Yeah.
Basically, that's what we need to form I guess, the society. What would it look like?
Yeah, as an experience for you. For you, yeah.
without changing too much, I guess it was like today, except you know, like, when it's, we wouldn't have so much. I think that the people would have more power with a libertarian society, so we wouldn't have so much separation like we do now because of censorship.
Okay, but what would, this is fine. So what, I'm thinking that Leslie and Maggie, you probably can't hear that, right? Okay, so what, just to summarize what you said. What you said was it would look like a lot less government. I'm sorry, what else?
I think that people would probably have to be out where they would be able to do something about all this big tech censorship.
Okay.
Big pharma has so much power.
Right.
Big tech has so much power. Most big industries have so much power.
Okay, so people would have more power against big tech and big pharma in your idea. Okay, so if that was present, if all of that was in place, what would your experience of life be? Yeah, like on a moment-to-moment basis. You'd be what? Okay, yeah. And if you were connected with nature, what would that look like for you? Just take the first thing that comes. Okay, that's what you're doing. What does it look like as a matter of being? Yeah. Well, would you be upset? Would you be happy? Would you be grateful? Would you be excited? Right. Go ahead, make something up. Well, what would light you up if you could, if you were that way? What would light you up? Yeah, but what does that give you? In other words, that's what you have. You've talked about what you would have and do. I'm asking who you would be. Trust? Okay. All right, but that now you were good with love and trust, but now you're into what you would have or what we would have. So stay with what you're being, who you're being. Okay. All right. All right. So let's take.
Can I chime in for a second, Frank?
Yeah, sure.
With what Daniel was talking about, and Arya about being like more in touch with nature and a little more control over our consumption, I would be empowered. I would feel empowered by that.
Oh yeah. Okay.
That's what their suggestion made me think.
I'm just going to put power, okay? And understanding that when I say power in this context, I'm really talking about like the ability to produce a result. I'm not talking about the ability to control or dominate other people. That's not what I'm talking about at all, right? I'm talking about being powerful in your life, being the ability to produce results with velocity. Yeah? Okay, great. All right. Okay. Well, if you want to chime in later, go ahead. Leslie, would you like to add anything?
I think it looks like cooperation and contributionism, and people are so eager to contribute to their community that to make it work for themselves and each other, that they're happy to do it, and everything gets done, and everyone lives in abundance.
Okay. All right, great. So what I'm going to add is, you guys to some extent have already touched on this, and that's great. what I started out at our very first session with, a world that works for everyone. Pow. Like, can you imagine that? Like, that would be, I mean, that would be these things. You're like well-being and peace of mind, trust and love and power, contribution, abundance, and a world that works for everyone. See, and that's the future. Did you want to add anything, Harley? Okay, if you think of something later, please let me know, okay? Because I would like to hear from you. You know, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I am genuinely curious about what you could create with this. Because I know there's something in that heart of yours. Okay. So that's the future that I want a presence here. That's the future I want you to walk out of here with. Clarity. Okay, I'll add that. Clarity's, yeah. So, like, this future isn't about fixing anything. You get that? It's not about more, better, different than what we have now. And it doesn't require necessarily on a moment-to-moment basis, doesn't require the agreement of others. It requires us to agree with the possibility. So it's not entirely dependent on our circumstances. You know, our circumstances are what they are, and who we're being in the matter of our life is who we're being. And who we're being in the matter of our life does not have to be given to us by our circumstances. It can be a creation. You know, if all we are is creatures of circumstance, then there's really no point in this class at all. There really isn't. Yeah? Okay. So what would a libertarian society look like? I kind of went someplace with that I didn't really expect to go. But now I want to look at like throw in a few things as to like the circumstances, okay? So there are a lot of people have sat down and taken libertarian principles and said, okay, what would a society based on those principles, how would it actually work? Right, because right now we have a state that claims a legitimate monopoly on the initiation of force. What that means is that the state says that I can use force, I can initiate force against others, and it's okay for us to do that, as long as it's only the state doing it, right? We don't want any competition from the mafia or militias or anybody else. It's like as long as we're initiating force, it's okay. So in a libertarian society, nobody would have the right to initiate force. No one. And anybody who did would be recognized as a criminal. See, that's what doesn't happen with the state, because they have people who go along with the idea that their initiation of force is legitimate. Then they're not recognized as the criminals that in a libertarian society they would be. Yeah. So what we need in a libertarian society is some way to provide the basic services of the state without having the state. And when you ask people what's the most essential service of the state, what do we need the state for? What's the most important thing we need the state for? Police, courts, justice, the functions of justice and security, right? That security might include national defense, right? But also, police functions, right? Like that. Yeah. So some other things that could come up would be, roads, education. We need the state to protect us with regulations from bad actors in the markets. Farmers who grow poison food, or whatever. Yeah, right. People who would pollute our air. They need to. In other words, we need the state to protect us from each other. Basically, right? Like whether that's a foreign invader or a guy selling chocolate bars that are poison, or a bad driver on the highways, or whatever. And then ultimately, we also rely on the state, and maybe this wouldn't be high on the list, but we rely on the state to supposedly protect us from ourselves. Right? Tell us, no, don't shoot that heroin, Daniel. I'm just kidding. But like that, right? So you shouldn't do that. Or you must go to school. You're 10 years old. You must go to school. Right? You don't have a choice in the matter because the government says so. So these are the kinds of things that we rely on the state for. So if we're going to have a stateless society, by the way, not all libertarians are advocates for a stateless society. Some libertarians are advocates for a minimal, very small government that would produce, say, the services of police and justice and defense only. Those are minarchists, as in minimal rule. Archy just means rule. Anarchy is without rule. Not without rules, but without a ruler, I should say, right? And then, so minarchy would be minimal ruler. So in anarchy, right. So I'm going to refer here to a stateless society, but I don't want to, completely overlook that there are minarchist libertarians out there. And I'm not really in an argument with them here. I think there is an argument to be made against minarchism, certainly, which is that, experience has shown that, the American experience in particular, that when you create a very small government, the problem is that it doesn't stay that way. Okay, how about risk? Yeah, right. The risk that life is. Well, no, it's not. Yeah, because there's nothing that says that a world with well-being and peace of mind isn't going to, that life is going to life us. I'm sorry?
When we think about just those things,
yeah.
I think of a lot of those things. So when we think about just those things, we're leaving all those things out. And then who's that question? Like, well, who's going to be the policing and all that stuff?
Well, let's talk about that now. So, so in a stateless society, how would the services of police and justice, how would those be provided? Provided by the people? Okay, but aren't they provided by people now? The services of police and justice.
Yes.
I see. Okay. So in order to provide the functions of police and justice, we still need some level of organization, right? I mean, some kind of organization. See, one of the functions of government is government is a way that we organize ourselves. And a stateless society isn't one without organization, because organization is what allows us to work together and cooperate and live together. Right? If you're living alone in a cave somewhere, you don't need organization. But if what you're trying to do is produce automobiles in a factory, you damn well better have some organization. Otherwise, you ain't going to produce a single car. Right? If you're going to feed billions of people, you better have some way of organizing it. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of hungry people. Right? So if you're going to provide police and justice functions for 7 billion people, it might behoove us to think about how we're going to organize that. Otherwise, we might not produce sufficient police and justice services for those 7 billion people. So a stateless society is not one that's not organized. In fact, I would argue that a stateless society could potentially be far better organized, far more organized than one with a state. Why is that?
To serve the only government under what I'm saying is if you had people that were in a perfect, like if we were around, I think that's something like that. The people will be the police, and it have to be moral.
That doesn't mean anything. The people would be the police. Like, I would not be the police. Look, I mean, I don't know. You don't. When you say the people would be the police, do you mean everybody would be the police? Whoever volunteered? Okay.
Not everyone could do that.
But that's not a police function.
What?
So, well, stopping crime would be, I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. Let me just move on here. Thank you. Okay. So in a free market, free markets are capable of producing police and justice functions. They already do to some extent. For example, the private security function or business in this country does hundreds of billions of dollars a year worth of business. Another example would be dispute resolution organizations that already function to arbitrate disputes around contracts. So these are people who, in return for money, in return for pay, resolve disputes between people or companies. So we already have a free market in security and dispute resolution. There is an extent to which the government crowds that out, and the government, as we discussed before, claims to be the ultimate arbitrator of all disputes in a given geographical area, right? So to some extent, the arbitration conducted by private agencies can be overridden or negated by the government. And if in a stateless society, there would be routes for appeal, but not necessarily, there would be no government nobody who could claim to be the ultimate arbitrator of all disputes in a given geographical area, right? So if you had a contract, part of the contract would be, okay, if there's a dispute about this contract, how will that be arbitrated, right? So you would agree in advance how any disputes are going to be arbitrated before you did the transaction. Okay, a store might post something at the door saying, okay, if you have a dispute with us about what you buy here, come to us about it. If we can't solve it with you, then, by entering this premises and doing business with us, you agree that so-and-so will arbitrate the dispute. So you would have multiple competing dispute resolution organizations. And the process of competition would help to ensure that fair and efficient and inexpensive dispute resolution organizations would succeed, whereas those who were not fair or not efficient or not well priced for what they delivered would not succeed. Unlike government, which is a monopoly, right? And so if you don't like the quality of justice you receive by government, raise your hand. Or if you don't think that the price charged is fair for what they give you, raise your hand again. Then, under a nation state, tough. Yeah, I mean, you're stuck with what you got. So that's a little bit about how a libertarian society would provide or might provide police and justice functions. Now, we don't know all of how that might work out. Why don't we know that? Well, we don't know that because the entrepreneurs who would be working to develop those solutions haven't had a chance to do that yet, because the government is taking up most of the space in that part of the market, right? So when we take government out of it, we make room for entrepreneurs to come in and develop solutions. And we don't know what they're going to develop because they haven't developed it yet. So one thing we need to do is be willing to take a certain kind of risk. Yes, I mean, there's no sense in pretending that there's not a risk here, right? Anytime you give up the status quo in return for innovation, you take a risk. Okay. Well, are there any questions about what I've said so far? All right. So let's look at some of the things we're going to look at in terms of the future of liberty, some of the things that are working against it. And this will actually bring up some of our concerns about the future. So this is where we can talk about those. And I know we all have them. Lots of concerns. But I'll start us out since, hey, I'm the teacher, right? But I want to first say, again, we have a negativity bias about the future. And where does negativity bias ultimately come from? Could you turn that off, please? What is it? Could you mute everybody but me? All right, well, I'm just going to keep going. Okay, so we have a negativity bias concerning the future. That means that we're like oriented Okay, there, I'm unmuted. Okay, can you hear me, Leslie? Okay. So we have a negativity bias towards the future. We have an orientation of that, of what could go wrong and what we're going to do about it. And that probably comes from survival, right? I mean, the people who didn't have that outlook about the future were the ones who got eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. Yeah. So we kind of want to just be present to that that's how we are about the future. And it's just made up. It only exists between our ears. All right, so one of the things that has come up for me in terms of threats or possibilities about the future that are negative would be this phrase that you've probably all heard, the Great Reset. Yeah? And one of the things that came up around that was, you'll own nothing and be happy. And a general decay of what are called Western values. Another one that's come up is globalization. Now that's an interesting term. What does that even mean? I mean, the globe has always existed. We all have always lived on it. So it gets made up, since it doesn't really mean anything, or it means different things to different people. We've all made up our own meaning around it. And our negativity bias has influenced the meaning we've made up. So there are different kinds of things that globalization might mean. One, just to get a little more specific, would be the idea of some sort of global or world government, right? And that would be like some kind of government that would be over the nation state. And it would have powers over those nation states and the people in them. There's also the implication that that government would not be an elected one. Not that elections constitute any significant protection, but it's worth mentioning that, nobody's talking about having a global election. But so what would that mean for us? Well, that would mean a whole new domain of power, an entity with new powers, right? So some of those powers might be taken from the nation state, but also that there would be whole new powers invented and attributed to that world government. So it ultimately represents an expansion of government power. And that's why it looks like a threat to us, because we recognize that libertarians tend to think of, and I'm generalizing here, not all libertarians would agree with me about this, but the three chief concerns of a libertarian are war, central banking, and state power. If you had to sort of summarize the concerns of libertarians, those are the three domains where we have our concerns. Once again, war, central banking, state power. So a world government represents new concerns in the area of state power. And possibly new concerns in the area of central banking, because along with the world government, one of the things that New World Order has proposed is some sort of global money or currency, right? So there would be, instead of each country having its own central bank and its own money, its own ability to print money, create money, and all of that, we would have a single global money and a single global central bank that would control it. So other areas of concern are things around things like artificial intelligence and automation, right? There's the concern about that the future will bring about artificial intelligence, meaning machines that are smarter than we are, that might dominate us in some way, and automation that will make us redundant in the world of work. So those are some concerns as well. In the area of war, we have concerns about the expansion of war into outer space, the creation of ever more deadly weapons, the evolution, combining warfare with artificial intelligence, robots, soldier robots, right? Robots that conduct warfare against human beings. So those are some of the concerns that we have around negative prospects for liberty. Who else would like to, who would like to say what their concerns are? It says I've been muted by Leslie. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, thanks. All right, anybody want to say something? If you may be on mute. Yeah, it looks like everybody's muted but me. So you'll have to unmute if you want to share. Concerns about the future, come on. 4 of you here and nobody has any concerns about the future? Yeah, right.
Okay, so I'll jump in. Can
Okay.
you hear me?
Yes.
Who's talking?
Okay. My nickname is Anise. My formal name is Anastasia Golden Morper. And here's my
Whoa.
concerns. This is what I don't like that I have seen from our government is where they came in and took over. And the people followed them, or some of them did. And we have a great divide of people who swallowed the Kool-Aid, hook, line, and sinker, and I'm using both the Kool-Aid as in poison and the hook as in, can't get unhooked. And then you have the others that have absolutely no worry about the COVID or about the personal safety, personal distancing, but they are furious about the government's overreach. And what we need to be able to do is somehow get those who have been fearful sheeple, because there's too many of them, and give them some confidence and guidance and direction.
Yeah, okay.
That's
So that's great. And I'm sorry, how do you want me to call you? By what name?
My nickname is Anise. Not a nephew, but Anise. How's that?
Anise. Okay. Anise, well, welcome. I didn't even know you were here. So can you phrase that in terms of your concern about the future of liberty?
Sure. And I keep muting you. I am driving. So
That's okay.
my fear in the terms of the future is the government will overrun and we will become a monarchy, not a republic. We'll lose our republic.
Okay.
That's my fear.
Great.
And New Mexico is a perfect example versus South Dakota.
Right. So could I paraphrase that? Would it be accurate to say that your concern is an expansion of state power?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Good. Thank you,
And so
Anise.
let me give you a little background. I ran for Congressional District 3 because I'm fed up with the governor's overreach and basically the whole state overreach in government. And I had raised the most money. I had received the most signatures from the constituents. And the Secretary of State decided that I was a threat. Therefore, she declined to accept the petitions. They were qualified initially, and then a couple of days later, she disqualified them. I took her to the court. The lower court was basically afraid to rule. I took them to the Supreme Court, and even in a left-leaning Supreme Court, I won 4-1. Too late to be on the ballot, but that's overreach, extreme overreach of the government. And they were saying the reason why the justices ruled that way was because it was an overreach of current legislation. Yeah, they were making up their own laws, basically.
Right. So I get, Anise, that you have a complaint here, right? And that's fine. I mean, I get it. You've got your reasons, and I'm sure they're good reasons, and you've already given us some of them. But what I'm really concerned about here, what I'm trying to get at here, is our concerns for the future of liberty, not our complaints about the present. Not that we don't have them. I'm not in an argument with our complaints about the present. But my concern, my question here, my inquiry here is about the future of freedom and what our concerns there are specifically. And I get that one of those concerns is the expansion of state power. And maybe that's the main one, and that's fine. Anything else, Anise?
No, that's it. You nailed it. It's the overreach of the government. It's too much.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us. I'm sorry I didn't welcome you. I wasn't even aware that you were on the group here. It's a little hard to tell from looking at the screen.
I understand.
Who's with us. I guess I thought that was Daniel's tile there or something. But anyway, well, are you going to stick with us for the rest of the session?
As much as I can. I'll be able to stay on for another hour. I don't know how long your session is going to be.
Okay, well, thanks. Okay, so anyone else? Yeah, Maggie.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback off what Anise said. I mean, she was talking about overreach of government, and she was talking about individual people making decisions, taking actions, making decisions. My concern is a proliferation of people who make those government-centric decisions. I'm concerned about a weakening of personal grit in human beings, and that is a product of government subsidy, right? Like once we don't have to do our own policing, once we don't have to do our own courts, once we don't have to do our own conflict resolution or feeding or growing or bartering or whatever that we have to do, once that's subsidized by a system, we get weak. And my concern for the future is that weakness in individuals.
Okay, so if I understand you right, you're concerned about the impact on our character of weakness and dependence. Looks like Maggie's tied up, so I'll just take that. So yeah, so I think that's really good. Like one of the concerns.
What was your question, Frank?
I was just trying to summarize what you said, or recreate it. So what you talked about was how we had sort of delegated a bunch of things, important things, to other people, and that had an impact on our character.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's our culture, which I think is I think someone mentioned that earlier. Those things grow and perpetuate and pass on like genes, and that is about the future, right?
Yeah.
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 I'm going back to
Yeah. One of the things that I've been concerned about is that given that, government is that agency that asserts a legitimate monopoly on the initiation of force in a given geographical area, that actually, that whole principle represents a corruption of our character, because no one has the right to initiate force against another, right? Like, that's a basic moral principle that we sort of understand as children, right? Even as children, it's like, you don't go hit Bobby, because you don't start a fight with Bobby, right? You don't go steal Bobby's toys, right? You don't do that. But somehow when we grow up, then we change that. We give that up. And we accept that, if you have the right kind of uniform on, or a title or something, that it's then okay to initiate force against others or threaten to do that.
In my belief system, and so through a lot of these processes that we have really wants to transfer that power to our teachers, principals.
Let me repeat that, because I'm thinking you guys probably can't hear that. So what Daniel just said is that government for us represents a kind of transference of the parent-child relationship. The authority in parent-child relationship, as we grow up, we then transfer that role to the role of our parent to the government. So yeah, I think that's a good point, is that maybe that's, that some of the origins of the idea that it's okay to initiate force against another originates in parent-child relationships. Now, of course, it doesn't have to. And one of the things that Stefan Molyneux, who is a libertarian philosopher, has talked a lot about, is the whole idea of peaceful parenting, that you don't initiate force or threaten to initiate force against your child. And it's not just because that when they get older, they'll transfer that to government, but because it creates a parent-child relationship that is, well, less than ideal, at least. Yeah. So,
how can we, what would our idea of a future look like? So I think an idea for how we get example is to know when do we cut off? What is that? How I was kind of saying, I think it'd be a lot healthier society if we kind of did transfer that parent-child relationship, authoritarian relationship, over to people that have titles. So if there's some way for us in a libertarian society in the future implementing technology that transfer power, that there should really be that.
Yeah, at least to be aware that that's our tendency and to refrain from doing so. Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so what Daniel just said was that, in terms of a libertarian society, that we ought to avoid transferring that kind of parental authority to government. Yeah? Great. Okay, so that's some of the concerns that are there. I also put in, well, just in terms of the expansion of state power, one of the domains that state power seems to be headed in lately is the expansion of state power in what they're calling the Green Revolution, right? So this would be an expansion of state power in terms of what kind of car we're going to drive, and how our electricity will be generated and what price that electricity will be. Or in the case of Texas lately, whether that power will even be generated, right? Whether you'll have power or not, because certainly the Green Revolution principles had something to do with the reliance in Texas upon wind power. which turned out not to work so well in certain weather. So another area, and this kind of relates to the corruption of character we talked about before, but is the phenomenon of social alienation, and that sort of phenomenon seen that's quite common in youth, sometimes called failure to launch. Like something is happening there in the area of younger people that I think can be tied in part to the corruption of character we talked about, and the weakness and dependence that Maggie brought up, right? So that, one of my concerns about the future is that we're just going to be left with a lot of sort of limp, jello-like creatures without any real intellect or intelligence or competence, no skills, no passion, nothing they care about, and that represents a kind of an embracing of nihilism and amorality that ultimately threatens civilization itself, right? Because civilization was formed by people who, well, it wasn't formed by nihilists, and it was formed by people with strong moral principles and strong values, and people who were willing to take risks, people who had courage, the courage of their faith. That's what gave us civilization. Those were the people who created civilization, not the nihilists. All right. Well, now we're going to look, because we're kind of like moving till the end of this thing here. I want to bring us to some positive, some good news, some optimism around the future of liberty. So we presenced all that. We've had that conversation about all the scary stuff that's out there, all the dragons and lions and tigers and bears out there in our future. Okay? We've had that conversation. We've looked at those things. And now, for a moment, I want us to set those aside and just kind of clear the decks and make room for something new. Make room for something new to show up. You guys got to do this conversation with me. I can't do it all for you. This is not the do me part of the course, right? This is the part of the course where we are going to create something. We started out doing that, and we're going to pick that up again now as we move into the end of our course. So I want to first assert the possibility that the nation state as an institution is dying. You'd like that, eh, Leslie? Yeah, but can you believe that it's actually happening? Can you kind of see that too? Yeah? Yeah. I'm sorry? Well, look, I'm putting it out as a possibility, not as the truth, right? I want you to entertain this as a possibility. I want you to peruse it and kind of play with it and examine it and look it over, okay? I don't want you to encounter it as the truth, right? Because one of the problems is human beings are crazy with the truth. We get lunatic with the truth. That's why I try to stay away from that. Not because there isn't truth, but because people get so crazy about it, including me, by the way. So the nation state is done. There's a guy, I'm sorry, go ahead. So there is actually a book called, and I recommend this book highly, it's called The Rise and Decline of the State. I'd be happy. In fact, well, I'm not over here. So I'd be happy to send anybody a link. In fact, I'll put it up on the Telegram group. Anise, are you on the Introduction to Libertarianism Telegram group?
No, I don't believe I am.
Well, if you want to be, let somebody know and we'll get you on.
Do you want my email?
Well, are you on Telegram?
I'm on Telegram.
Okay, I
Yes.
just need your handle.
I don't remember what it is right now because I signed up for a whole bunch of things like Signal and
Okay,
Telegram.
well, stay on after the class. We'll figure out something, okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. I don't want to hold us up here. So hold up everybody else. So that's a great book. And basically it chronicles, part of it is history, which is talking about how the state came to be, which is a fascinating way to look at history, right? Like the nation state didn't always exist. In fact, it's a fairly new creation, right? And so how did that come to be, right? I don't think we can necessarily understand the nation state and how to, further the project of taking it apart and dismantling it if we don't understand how it evolved in the first place. So that book gets into that. And then it also looks at some of the things that, are working against the nation state. So how can we see the nation state struggling to grow or survive? That's a question. Who'd like to take it on? How can we see the nation state struggling to either grow or even to just survive? Well, you don't necessarily have to believe that it's dying in order to see that it's struggling to survive. You could believe that it's going to be successful in that struggle. And you could even believe that struggle will ultimately lead to an even stronger state. But for now, let's just look and see, where is it struggling? Now, I think some of the things that Anise talked about, suggest that, right? Like, they did stuff to suppress Anise's petition. And yet, she was ultimately able to be victorious with that. Did I get that right, Anise?
You got it right, but it wasn't because it was my petitions. They were my petitions, but what bothered me is they were the signatures of people that represented their word and what they wanted. It was, it was our First Amendment right, the right to petition. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I hear you. Daniel is saying something, trying to explain to me what's going on. What was the petition for?
The petition was to run as a candidate for Congressional District 3.
Okay. All right. So, so you were ultimately able to have that petition validated. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. It was after the fact. So, but that's an example of what I mean. It's like, the state kind of, well, it doesn't always win in every way. So one of the ways to look at this question is, where is the state not winning its fight for more power?
Well, it only happens when the people stand up. I stood up for our First Amendment right. But had I backed down, had I not stood up for that, I knew that I was out of the race. Because if they weren't going to accept my petitions, getting more petitions wasn't going to help. But I had to stand up for our First Amendment right, not for me, but to create case law and to stand up for each and every person who signed my petition for me. It was the right of the people. It was the people's right that they were stomping on. And they were creating their own laws, and it was not a law, what they were trying to push down everybody's throat.
I gotcha.
What kind of is short-term, very kind of one issues that actually learning all about, but long-term, T1 issues of case law.
No, I get it. So let's look at some other areas where the state is struggling. Let me toss one out here. They've had to put up fences and put troops around government buildings. Yeah? Now, whether they had to do that or not, it kind of does tell you that somebody is concerned over there. Yeah, but they're still there, right? Thank you. Yeah. So they're still there. They're there. Their fences, concrete barriers, the whole 9 yards. Who knows? I don't know when they're going to put in the minefields. But like that could be coming, right? The tanks, right? That's how they've done it in other countries, is they bring in tanks. Now we're not that, that would be like the next step. Hello, Nova.
My take on putting up those fences is they anticipated doing things against the people, and they were protecting themselves from the people when they already had this whole thing planned out of what bills and laws they were going to shove past and throw down our throats. So that was the purpose of the fencing, because they already anticipated their wrongdoing.
Yeah. So clearly the government is struggling to survive here, or appears to be struggling to survive, in the sense that they are making a show of force, right? And you don't do a show of force if you're not threatened,
Right.
right? I mean, you just don't, right? So I would say that is a sign. Another sign to me is the ability to wage a lot of war, but not the ability to win them, right? I mean, we've been at war for 20 years in Afghanistan. We're no nearer a victory there than we were when we started. In fact, arguably, we're further from a victory there than when we started, all right? We went into Iraq, and now they want to throw us out. In fact, they did throw us out. We just refused to leave, right? But so those are just a couple of examples, right? The war on terror is not a war that we can win. Now, you could argue that we were never intended to win it, right? And I would say that's probably true. I would probably agree with that. But the point is that, there was a time when America won wars, right? And that was always good for the state. I mean, the state could take a victory lap, right? The government could take a victory lap with that. Well, when was the last time the government took a victory lap in war? I think it was when George Bush got on that aircraft carrier after Iraq War. After Desert Storm 2, and said, "Mission accomplished," right? Well, what a joke that was, right? I mean, no mission was accomplished. The only mission accomplished was we had a successful invasion, but we didn't win that war, right? So, to me, this is a weakening of the state relative to, say, where we were at the end of World War II, when we had a clear and decisive victory. Not that I'm advocating for World War II, but I'm just saying that was a peak of state power. That was a peak of state power, right? Because the end of World War II was a peak of state power. We were at that point in history, we were the most powerful government on the planet. We had most of the gold, so forth and so on. Anyway, so to me, in a lot of ways, I see government struggling to hold things together. Right. Another bit of evidence is, this whole the stimmy checks. Right. This is buying us off with borrowed money. Right. So you don't buy people off with borrowed money unless you're afraid that if you don't buy them off, something bad is going to happen to you. You know, so you know, the whole that whole and one of the foundations or pillars of government legitimacy is elections. Well, now how did this last election last November go? Pardon my French, but it was a shit show. Right? You know, it was a disaster. Yeah. So the disaster of that election undermines government legitimacy. Government legitimacy is the only thing that makes the government possible. I mean, we outnumber the government vastly, even as big as it's gotten. So without legitimacy, government will not survive. And we've seen this. The collapse of the Soviet Union was basically a story of people no longer believing the government was legitimate. And it was just a matter of time once that happened before that government fell and disappeared from the planet. It just disappeared. So government's in trouble in a lot of ways. Government is in trouble in a lot of ways. Another positive factor for liberty, I think, may lie in demographics. So the world is generally getting older. Our population is getting older, I should say, right? Particularly in the developed countries, the average age has climbed dramatically. Japan is the most extreme example, but we've also seen that here. The average age, I don't know what it is, but it's gone up dramatically. Older people tend to be wiser, more independent, more accomplished, more secure, less willing to be taxed, even though they're willing to accept redistribution themselves, they're less willing to be taxed, and they tend to resist being parasitized over younger people. Now, you may not agree with all that statement, but I'm putting it out there as a consideration. I think that older people, in general, and obviously this is a big generalization, right? There's all going to be millions of exceptions, but they're going to be more accomplished and maybe a little more skeptical about government power. I think also as populations grow, governments become less tenable. For example, the federal government in this country was created when the population was a tiny fraction of 1% of what it is now. So the idea of a single city being the seat of government for that small population and that much smaller geographical area, right, just the 13 colonies, made more sense than a single city being the seat of government for a vast continent and hundreds of millions of people. So the nation state has not sort of transferred well to a larger population and a larger landmass. It's much more of an awkward arrangement, and people recognize that. They experience it. Yeah, Maggie. Can't hear you. You're muted. There you go.
I just say we have to unplug. I have to go do stuff. I just wanted to say bye.
Okay, bye, Maggie.
Bye.
So another thing that I think has helped advance or is a positive prospect for liberty is libertarianism itself. Libertarianism itself is a fairly new thing. It has roots that go back maybe, well, I would say to the 16th and 17th century. This is the 15 and 1600s, right? So it's been around, you know, some of these ideas have been around for a while, but libertarianism as a distinct political philosophy is basically a phenomenon of the 20th century. So we're talking about something that's less than 100 years old. So I think just the fact that libertarianism even exists is actually a positive factor for the prospects of liberty. And the homework has been done, and is being done, around specific ways to implement a libertarian society. I've tried to introduce some of those things to you here, you know, ways that we can solve problems and address needs working from libertarian principles. Yeah. So we spent a lot of time looking at that. So that isn't a conversation that really existed 100 years ago. 100 years ago, we wouldn't have been having this conversation at all. So, you know, if you want to look at positive factors for a libertarian society in the future, you can look to this class right here. Just the fact that we can do this, that we have these ideas available, that, you know, I didn't invent them. I'm just sort of here to share them with you, right? But I had to go somewhere and find them. I didn't invent them. Like I said, they were already there for me to discover and learn about. And then I could come here and share them with you. And you guys have contributed to me as well. So what would I say about, if I was to suggest some ways that you can advance liberty and freedom in the world? Right? Because that's a question. What should I do? What should I do? So, to me, I think spreading good ideas through our conversations, whether they're one-on-one with, you know, the people we're close to in life, or whether it's, you know, with larger groups or whatever, is to actually share the best ideas, the best ones, the ones that are pristine and the ones that shine. And to me, those are the two foundation principles of libertarianism: the non-aggression principle and property rights. Like, advocate for those. That would be my suggestion. And learn to do it. The way you advocate for those ideas is you start by opening your damn mouth. Open your mouth and take a risk of what comes out. I mean, we don't know how it's going to go. We don't know how it's going to go, but we open our mouth anyway. And we find out. And we take what we get. People aren't always going to agree with us. Hey, that's part of the game. You know, you don't always win. But you know, sometimes when it looks like you lose, you might not actually have all the facts. Sometimes the difference we make isn't reported to us by the people for whom we made the difference. They don't always come tell us. In fact, I would say 9 times out of 10 people don't, right? But that doesn't mean we didn't make a difference. That just means they didn't report it to us. So having the courage and the care and the passion to share the best ideas, just the best ones, you know, because time is precious. We don't have much attention from people, right? We don't have much of their time. So don't waste our time with a lot of, you know, marginal ideas or so-so ideas. Get the best ideas and then put those forward. There's really nothing more important, you know? Another thing is to advance moral philosophy. And we start by doing that in our own lives. So how we live our own lives is extremely important because people are watching. And if they see the lives of libertarians being miserable and fraught with fear and paranoia and bad ideas, weak ideas, junk ideas, you know, then that leaves them with an impression, right? So it's really important that we live great lives. It's really, really important. And that means like being complete and straight in our relationships, being, you know, honest, bringing integrity, bringing leadership, you know, those things. So, you know, avoiding fear mongering. So we don't try to manipulate others with fear. And we don't allow ourselves to be manipulated that way. If we need it, in the case of one of the questions that comes up in this conversation is, what about defending ourselves with force? Right? That question comes up. At what point should we say no to the state and say, cross that line and there's going to be shooting? So what I want to say is this. I mean, if you look at history, there have been lots of violent revolutions. Generally, they didn't go well and they didn't end well. They didn't advance freedom. There are exceptions. But even the American Revolution seems to have only advanced freedom in a temporary way. So I don't think that violent revolution is the solution to our problem. I just don't. I don't think that resisting the state with force is necessarily morally wrong, but I don't think it is tactically or strategically correct. Can you see the difference? Mm-hmm. If we want to bring about liberty and freedom in our world, we may have to do it with little or no use of force. And that will require a level of patience that using force in a revolution wouldn't require, right? So one of the temptations with this battle for our freedom is to become impatient and resort to force of arms. Like, I want my freedom, I want it now. I can understand that. Believe me, I don't want to wait. I want my freedom, and I want it now. Thank you very much. Having said that, two questions come up. Would a violent revolution actually bring that freedom about? And I'd say probably not. Very doubtful, actually. Once you start a violent revolution, your ability to control the outcome, you don't. It ain't going to, however you expected it to go or wanted it to go, you can almost bet it that won't be the outcome. There will be an outcome, but it probably won't be the one you wanted. Who just joined us? Is that a niece? I'd like to at least know who's here. Seems like a reasonable thing, right? Since I'm talking about this topic. Who just joined us? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. It's Anise.
Hi, Anise. Welcome in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome back, I should say. So I guess that's really what I wanted to say about that. This time, I think we're going to have to be patient and produce the revolution through ideas and the sharing of ideas. And that makes that sharing of ideas and how we do it, what ideas we share and how we share those ideas, extremely important. It also makes the example of our own life very important. So another thing we need to think about is dealing with bad ideas, right? Both the ideas of our statist opposition, whose ideas are mostly pretty bad, to be sure, but also bad ideas in our own court, in our own house. Yeah? So there are always going to be bad ideas. I don't think I'm not saying we got to get rid of all the bad ideas. But I am saying that we need to be discriminating and discerning in what ideas we embrace and advocate for, and what ideas we avoid, or at least don't support. This has been one of the roles I've tried to do in the New Mexico Freedom Cell Telegram group. Is I've tried to advance what I consider to be the good ideas, which are the ideas supported by reason and evidence, right? So those ideas versus the ideas that I consider to be just coming from fear and reaction. So refuting or dealing with bad ideas effectively actually matters too. And cleaning our own house, being trustworthy stewards and advocates of truth and goodness in our lives. That really matters. So live well. Live well. Have love. Have prosperity. Nurture goodness. Be a friend of truth. If you have a spiritual belief or religious belief that furthers you, embrace it. There is one book that I would recommend along these lines. It's called The 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos by Jordan Peterson. So I think just sort of to wrap up here, the problems and dangers that we face in the cause of liberty occur to us as unique and new, but they're actually very old challenges that have been with humanity for centuries, going back even as far as the early Christians and the early church. And they were dealing with state power themselves. So take heart. We're in this for the long haul. And you are shining examples of the best of humanity and civilization. And for that, I commend you. we turn that off, please? So the final thing I will say is, I'm going to quote Ludwig von Mises, whose motto was, "Do not give in to evil, but proceed ever more boldly against it." And with that, I thank you for attending the Introduction to Libertarianism course, and I will stand by for any questions.
So I kind of have a question about how you're saying that.
Can we turn this towards you so that everyone can hear?
No, I prefer not, please.
Well, bring it closer to them so at least people can hear. Because I don't want to have to repeat everything. While he's doing that, would someone else like to go?
Okay. Okay. Can you guys hear me? Okay, so I was kind of just thinking about the part where Frank was going over, saying that violence would never be the answer, would never get us anywhere.
I didn't say that.
In a libertarian, well, I don't know, what was it? You said something about we would never.
I didn't think that would give us the outcome we were after.
Okay, so I thought what I understood from it was, in your version of the perfect libertarian society, or to get there to that perfect libertarian society, that force would never be the answer. It would never get us there. We would never get more.
I don't think so, no. Yeah, that's right.
You don't think so? So
I don't think it'd get us there.
So I was going to ask you on that note, what do you believe about the right to bear arms? What would that do with that philosophy? Where would the Second Amendment end up? And what would be the purpose of having a Second Amendment?
Okay, well, based on the libertarian principles that I've already explained here, how do you think I'd answer that question?
I don't know. I'm a little like I'm just kind of
Property rights and the non-aggression principle, right? So working from the non-aggression principle, what is the non-aggression principle?
non-aggression.
No.
You just don't use unjust force. You just don't.
It's wrong to initiate force or threaten to initiate force or commit fraud against another. So what does that tell you about the right to keep and bear arms?
What does it tell me about what I believe my right?
So here's the thing is, Daniel, you need to learn to think this through for yourself, right? Right. I mean, I'm not always going to be around to give the libertarian answer to you, right? And so, I want you to take these principles and try to apply them to specific questions, because that's all I'm doing over here. Right? I mean, I'm not walking around with all these answers. I'm just know these principles. And so when someone asks me a question like that, I say, okay, what are these principles and how do they apply to this question? And you can do that too.
Yeah. Well, that's where I'm going to say I object and I don't agree. That's what I mean. You don't agree. Is I believe the Second Amendment right is there. And it shouldn't change. The reason why it's there, and it should always be there.
Well, we do agree on that. So the only thing I would say is it's not a Second Amendment right. The Second Amendment simply describes a right. Right. It does not confer a right. Right. We don't get the right to keep and bear arms from the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment merely describes a right which existed prior to when the Constitution was written, and in fact has always existed as long as there have been human beings.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay.
But kind of like, isn't the Constitution an instruction?
You could say it's an instruction to the government, right? the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's an instruction to the government, keep your damn hands off their guns. But it doesn't give us a right. I mean, we have the right, even if the Second Amendment had never been written, we would still have the right to keep and bear arms.
But would we have arms like in other countries? You wouldn't.
Well, it might be denied us, but like I said in the very first class, right? It is a misnomer to say that our rights are taken away. Our rights always are our rights. Our ability to exercise them couldn't be taken away or denied to us in some way. But the rights would still be ours, right? So the rights are inherent in you. They're just as much a part of you as your liver or your heart or your arm or your head. I mean, your ears, your nose. It's just part of you. And it cannot, even the Declaration of Independence describes certain rights are inalienable. That means they cannot be separated from us, right? And that includes the right to self-defense. And to have the implements and tools to perform that self-defense. So I am a fierce advocate of the right to keep and bear arms. Just so you know, personally, that's what I am. Now, I'm not speaking as a libertarian necessarily here, but as a man. I am also a firearms owner and a regular shooter, like weekly. Okay? So, does that answer your question? Okay.
I just kind of wanted to put my stance on it.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Leslie, you're on mute. Oh, or maybe we're muted.
No.
Technical difficulties, stand by.
No.
Are you muted, Leslie? You're muted.
No.
She had the little microphone with the slash through it.
No.
She just turned it off. Okay. We can see you talking. Stand by. Denise is muted.
Are you still there? Or can you- I'll just call her.
Leslie's muted again.
No.
Okay, can you hear us now, Leslie?
Yeah, we just can't hear her.
Still can't hear you.
It has to be on her end because it's on.
Put your point over her tile. Okay, she's not muted.
Hit mute or unmute.
This happened last time.
Well, should we have her disconnect and reconnect?
Yeah, she's gonna.
Leslie, why don't you try, maybe you could try disconnecting and then reconnecting.
Did you want to say something?
There's Leslie.
Can you hear me
Say
now?
something. Say something.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, barely.
Oh, Lord.
Ah, there you are. Hi, welcome back.
Hi. The sound just decides to quit every time. I hear everyone just fine, and then it just quits. Let's see, what was I going to say? Oh, on the aggression thing, I think that they are trying to push us towards aggression, and so there's chaos and mayhem, and then they can swoop in with their solution, and then we're back to where we were. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
Well, you know, my comment on that would be, there may be some people with that idea, but I don't know specifically who they are or what power they have to bring that about. I also think there's lots of people who find that idea, the idea of provoking others into violence, to be a terrible idea and abhorrent to them. So, when you say they have a plot to provoke us, it's kind of important to say who they actually is. Like, to hang a name on that.
Weren't we talking about government, though?
Well, okay, but governments are a whole bunch of people, right?
Oh.
So if your answer to who they is the government, well, no, so the government is really, in a sense, a fiction, right? It is composed of individual people who have all sorts of beliefs and motives and desires and agendas, right? So is it your belief that every single individual in the federal government, for example, is out to provoke us into violence? Or is it only some people? And if so, which people? What are their names?
Maxine Waters, Michelle Lujan Grisham. There's quite a few of them that we could
All
list.
right.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, it might be a really big list, but it's kind of important to realize that it is a finite list, and it does not consist of every single government employee.
Right.
So, because when we say they, we've created a fiction, right? They could be anybody or nobody. So if you're going to attribute a motive to somebody, fine, attribute the motive to them. But say who you're attributing the motive to. Because they is not somebody. Right? They leaves us powerless. We don't know who to talk to about it. Anyway, so I get when you have a concern about that, or a complaint, or both, that there are people out there trying to provoke us. Yeah. I mean, I think there are probably people on the other side, on the blue pill side, who feel the same about us. It's like they look at somebody like Derek Chauvin and say, here is a red pillar out killing black men. And they're provoked by that. Now, I'm not saying they're right. I'm not defending anybody here. You understand that? I'm not saying that their point of view is right or anything like that. But it's kind of useful to look at things from the other side, because there is another side. A lot of people found Trump pretty damn provocative. And I can sort of see why. Well, I don't know. I'm not saying he incited something because that describes a specific behavior, right? But they'll say that, right? Like those, they may say that. So, okay, there's provocation going around, So one of the things I think that's a mark of maturity and a mark of character is that you resist being manipulated. You resist being provoked. And yet at the same time, if you look at the way the Revolutionary War started, the battles of Lexington and Concord, that was arguably a provocation. Yeah. The British marched onto Lexington Green and shots were fired. Who fired the first shot is not exactly clear. But the fact that the British were on Lexington Green was itself provocative. So there may come a time to be provoked. All right. Thank you, Leslie. Anise, did you want to say anything in closing?
Good conversation, interesting, thought-provoking, so thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate the invite on the site that I got. I am just getting off of the freeway, so it was a good discussion. Thank you.
Oh, we get to see. Oh, I got to see a little bit of your face there. I don't think you and I have ever met. Yes.
I'm not real sure about that. You look familiar, so I'm not sure. I don't know.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. Yeah. All right. You guys all finished?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Some new stuff? Good. Daniel, you all set?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm definitely open to doing that. Like I said earlier, my idea was here, one of the things I care most about is advancing good ideas, right? The best pristine ideas. And so when I can find an opportunity to do that, I like to participate. I don't like to pass up a lot of those opportunities because they're important and precious to me. That's who I am, a friend of the best ideas. And one of those is liberty. Yeah. All right, everybody. Take care. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.